Such were the teenage years of the boy who would become the most famous outlaw in America. Jesse and Frank James had grown up in a slave-owning home that strongly supported the Missouri border ruffians during the years before the war. Once the war started, that support only grew. First Frank, then Jesse a few years later, at age 16, joined up with Quantrill's Raiders. Soon they were both riding under Bloody Bill Anderson, along with Archie Clements, Cole and Jim Younger, Clell Miller, and most of the members of the group that would later be known as the James Younger Gang. Their mother, Zerelda Samuel, upon hearing that they had been involved in the Centralia massacre, responded that she was proud of her boys and that she asked God to protect them in their work. When the war was over, the James and Younger brothers took skills they'd learned as bushwhackers and applied them to banks and other targets. They may have joined Archie Clements, one of their old leaders, in the first daylight peacetime robbery in the U.S. The Liberty Tribune reported on the robbery of the Clay County Savings Association in Liberty, Missouri, February 13, 1866.
Our usually quiet city was startled last Tuesday by one of the most cold-blooded murders and heavy robberies on record. It appears that in the afternoon, some 10 or 12 persons rode into town, and 2 of them went into the Clay County Savings Bank and asked the clerk, William Bird, to change a $10 bill. And as he started to do so, they drew their revolvers on him and his father, Mr. Greenup Bird, the cashier, and made them stand quiet while they proceeded to rob the bank. After having obtained what they supposed was all, they put the clerk and cashier in the vault, and no doubt thought they had locked the door, and went out with their stolen treasure, mounted their horses, and were joined by the balance of their gang and commenced shooting. Mr. S.H. Holmes had 2 shots fired at him. Young George Wymore, aged about 19 years, was shot and killed while standing on the opposite side of the street.
Some have said Jesse James, at least, couldn't have participated in the robbery, as he was still healing from a serious chest wound. Regardless, he and Frank joined with Cole Younger and his brothers, Jim, John, and Bob, in a series of bank, stagecoach, and train robberies that would span decades. Jesse wasn't the leader of the gang. That may have been Archie Clements originally, and afterward Jesse and Frank shared that role with Cole Younger. But over time, Jesse became the gang's public face because Jesse himself loved the publicity. He wrote letters to governors, journalists, and lawmen, generally proclaiming his innocence in flowery prose that endeared him to many in a South still angry at their loss in the Civil War. His alliance with Kansas City Times editor John Newman Edwards helped in this. Edwards' editorials praising Jesse James and denouncing the federal government and the Republican Party helped make Jesse a hero. Jesse James was often presented then, and is often imagined today, as a sort of 19th century Robin Hood. But there is no evidence that James was giving his plunder to the poor. And as for robbing the rich, well, they were the ones with the money. History writer T.J. Stiles has made a convincing case that Jesse's outlaw career was truly an extension of his guerrilla activity under Anderson and Quantrill. His targets often had a connection to Union or Republican interests, or symbolized those interests to Jesse. That was certainly the case in the first robbery, in which Jesse James was clearly identified. Although he was likely involved in various robberies undertaken by former members of Anderson's guerrillas, the first bank robbery and murder that could be pinned on Jesse was of a bank in Gallatin, Missouri in December 1869. The robbery in Gallatin was motivated by more than financial gain. During the robbery, Jesse murdered a cashier that he believed was the man responsible for killing Bloody Bill Anderson during the war. He was mistaken, and he drew the attention of the law. Then, in June 1871, he went a step further. He got the attention of the Pinkertons. Allan Pinkerton was a Scottish immigrant moving to the U.S. in 1842. He joined the abolitionist cause, providing his Illinois home as a stop on the Underground Railroad. In the 1850s, Pinkerton formed what would later become the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, or more commonly, the Pinkertons. During the war, Pinkerton served as the head of the Union Intelligence Service, the forerunner of the U.S. Secret Service. In February 1861, his agency identified a conspiracy to assassinate President Abraham Lincoln as he was traveling to be sworn in. Though today some question the true level of threat, at the time seen as real, and steps were taken to assure the president's safety. Throughout the war, Pinkerton agents worked as Union spies, going undercover to gather military intelligence. After the war, Pinkerton's agency focused on tracking down outlaws. In an age before the FBI, the Pinkertons were often hired by the U.S. government or express companies to track down and bring in bandits whose criminal activity spanned large areas. It wasn't long before the Pinkertons crossed paths with the James Younger Gang. Such was the flair of Jesse James. He liked to be noticed. He was noticed by the Pinkertons. Another of Allan Pinkerton's sons, Robert, joined a posse that chased the gang through the lower counties of Iowa. Local law didn't have authority once they crossed state lines, but the Pinkertons were not bound by jurisdiction. When the trail continued into Missouri, Robert Pinkerton followed alone. Robert's brother, William, later recounted,
Robert continued following the trail to the Missouri River, where the band separated, some crossing at Sibley Ferry, others at Blue Mill Ferry, all meeting afterwards at the Old Blue Mill, from which point they continued south, evidently making toward the James home in Clay County. Here, Robert Pinkerton, recognizing the folly of continuing alone, withdrew.
A member of the James Younger Gang would eventually be captured for the Corydon bank robbery. Clell Miller posted bail, however, and never went to trial. The Pinkertons and the James Younger Gang would clash again, repeatedly, over the next several years. The Pinkertons would hunt for the gang again after an 1874 train robbery. The Transcontinental Railroad opened up the West even further, and it meant the beginning of a new crime, train robbery. In 1907, Allan Pinkerton's son, William, described train robberies in the mid-19th century.
The average train robbery band formerly consisted of from 5 to 8 men. Usually the hold-up man, to avoid identification and arrest, covers his face below the eyes with a triangular cloth or pocket handkerchief tied to the back of the head, wore a soft hat well down over his eyes, although in many of the great train and bank robberies shortly after the war, no masks of any kind were worn. Usually in these train robberies, one member of the band, with a red lantern or flag, at a lonely spot would signal the train to a standstill, or one or two would board the blind end of a baggage or express car nearing the point selected for the robbery, would climb over the tender into the locomotive, cover the engineer and fireman, while others of the bandits uncoupled the express or money car and forced the engineer to carry them a mile or two distant, where the cars and safes would be forced open with dynamite. Resistance usually resulted in the death of those who interfered. Escapes were usually made with horses in waiting, in charge of a Confederate at the place of the robbery, and often with relays of horses previously arranged, for covering 500 or 600 miles until they arrived at their homes or hiding places.
After a train robbery in 1874, the Adams Express Company hired the Pinkertons to investigate the James Younger gang. Pinkerton sent an agent to Liberty, Missouri, to gather information on the James brothers. That agent was captured and killed. Another was sent to St. Clair County, Missouri, tracking the Youngers. He was waylaid on the road, along with a former deputy sheriff who was guiding him. Both were killed, though one managed to shoot and kill John Younger in the gunfight. Pinkerton was rocked by the losses. The Adams Express Company determined not to pursue the case further, but for Pinkerton, this was no longer business. It was personal. Moving more cautiously now, he set up a base near the James's mother's home. Jesse and Frank frequently returned to visit their mother, Zerelda Samuel, who supported the gang by providing meals and intimidating witnesses. Pinkerton's plan was to firebomb Zerelda's house while Jesse and Frank, as well as the rest of the household, were inside. Unfortunately, Jesse and Frank had already left the home. The incendiary device that the men hired by Pinkerton hurled into the home exploded, killing not the outlaws, but their 8-year-old half-brother. Zerelda was seriously wounded, and part of her arm had to be amputated.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to help us produce more compelling historical content like this, please like, comment below, and share this video with fellow history buffs. And of course, be sure to subscribe to help keep history happening.